Welcome to WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast series from PharmaVOICE. This episode was made possible by a generous sponsorship from Ogilvy Health. For more information, visit ogilvyhealth.com. In this episode, Taryn Grome, editor-in-chief of PharmaVOICE magazine, meets with Casey Lynch, co-founder and CEO, Alzheimer.
Casey, welcome to the PharmaVOICE WOW podcast program.
Thank you, Taryn. Pleasure to be here.
I am so intrigued by your background. I know that you have founded a number of biotech companies. So my natural first question is, why are you a serial entrepreneur?
Yeah, thank you. I came about it initially as a scientist. So my scientific training was at UCSF and Stanford, and I was working on Alzheimer's disease. So I've always had a love for science, but also had an interest in bringing that science further than an academic lab generally allows you to. So when I was at Stanford, a postdoc in my lab had an idea for a company, and we worked together on both the science and the business plan, and that was my first venture. And I think the fact that I've done it multiple times, it really comes from a drive around the particular idea. When there's something that's so compelling that it really just has to be brought forward, and you realize you're the only one who's going to do it.
And what was that first company's name?
First company was called Aspira Biosystems, and we were working on a platform for understanding disease. It was the genomics, proteomics heyday, and it was a platform for understanding 100,000 proteins at a time instead of looking at biomarkers one by one.
So that is such relevant research for today. And how is that research being used currently? Do you know?
Yeah, the company was acquired in a private transaction, and it's still ongoing. It's a very difficult technology to control, but a very high-risk, high-reward venture.
Excellent. And what was your next company?
My next company was an investment advisory firm called NeuroInsights, and we created this firm seeing the emergence of many companies focused around neuroscience that we felt were underappreciated by investors. And we wanted a way to write up the information about these companies, analyze the assets, bring the community together in conferences, for example. And so I worked with many investors in pharmaceuticals over that time to look at a lot of different assets in the neuroscience space and do some matchmaking to create a tide that lifts all boats.
That's excellent. And does that investment background help you as you continued on your entrepreneurial journey, knowing what the ins and outs of what it is to raise money in a startup kind of environment?
Exactly. I worked with a lot of different startups over that period, in addition to the in and out licensing analysis. And so I just really loved doing that, helping scientists, entrepreneurs think through the strategy and raise funding. And that's really what led me to Alzheimer, actually, is I've always been very interested in Alzheimer's disease, and this was really the first asset in Alzheimer's disease that I felt like could address the disease.
You know, we're going to get into the Alzheimer's aspect in just a second, but I just want to go back to your entrepreneurial journey. Being a serial entrepreneur yourself and having worked with entrepreneurs through the venture fund, do you see where there are some commonalities in terms of that entrepreneurial makeup or mindset? And what might those be?
Well, I think there has to, number one, be a passion and a drive around the science. So again, just this feeling that this must be pursued and you're the right one to do it. And then the second half of the equation is risk tolerance. And that's something that's, I'm not sure where it comes from. It can be taught, but I grew up in Silicon Valley, so I think some of it was being around a lot of entrepreneurial people as I was growing up.
something in the water there, right? You just become accustomed seeing these people taking those risks, and, sometimes big risks, some big rewards, and sometimes big risks and not big rewards. But at the same time, it seems everybody sort of comes out on the top. And it's that passion that drives you all.
That's right. That's right. And realizing that, you can't always control the outcome, but you can make your best effort and take all the next right steps, and that's really defined as success.
Fantastic. So let's talk about the work that your company is doing. There's been a lot of press lately about so many failures in that Alzheimer's space. So why do you think that you are on to a winning program?
Right. So we know that there's a lot more going on in the brain of patients than just beta amyloid. And the last 30 years of research around Alzheimer's disease has really been focused only on that target, removing beta amyloid from the brain, blocking production of beta amyloid. But we know now that there's neuroinflammation in the brain. There's microglial activation, which are the immune cells of the brain. There's inflammasome activation. So there are about 10 different pathways that are actually immune system pathways that are activated in the brain of patients. And when people started asking, I think, a very good question, which is, why is the beta amyloid being produced? This is the component of plaques. They discovered that it behaves like an antimicrobial peptide, which are induced in response to infection.
That's fascinating. So you're saying that Alzheimer's might be approached in terms of treatment because of an immunological issue or factor.
Right. So I became very convinced that there was something upstream, an infection, upstream of all of this pathology that was driving not just the beta amyloid, but all this other detrimental pathology and the ongoing toxicity to cells. We've had a lot of trials, as you said, testing if removing beta amyloid can help patients, and it just wasn't working. So it seemed clear we need to get upstream of that. We need to figure out what's triggering all of this pathology. And meanwhile, my co-founder, Steve Dominy, was at UCSF. He's an expert in HIV dementia. So he was researching infectious causes of neurological disease and came across some very important literature showing that periodontal disease or gum disease is actually a risk factor for Alzheimer's later in life. So he went looking for the bacteria called Porphyromonas gingivalis, which causes this chronic degenerative disease in the mouth, and also very similar low-grade inflammation and other pathways that we see activated in the brain. He went looking for it in the brain of Alzheimer's patients and found it there.
That's fascinating. And so where are you right now in development or in progress with looking at what all with your findings?
Yeah, so the next step when I came on board, in order to prove causation, we infected some mice with the same bacteria in their mouth, and we found that it got into their brain and triggered beta amyloid, inflammation, detrimental effects on tau, and most importantly, the degeneration of hippocampal neurons, which are the memory center of the brain. So we went on to develop our own small molecule therapeutics. We went through phase 1 studies, including in some Alzheimer's patients with some very promising data. And now we're conducting a pivotal phase 2-3 study called the GAIN trial in the U.S. and Europe.
How many folks are involved in that trial?
This will be a 570-patient study, so it's very well-powered to show efficacy.
That's fascinating. I had learned something about the tau protein a while back, and there's been some research in that as a counter to the amyloid research. So you're following a somewhat similar pathway. Yes? No?
Yeah. We think tau is very important, and we've shown that this bacteria, it's an intracellular asaccharolytic bacteria. So asaccharolytic bacteria actually use proteins for nutrition. So it actually sits inside cells and chops up proteins, and tau is one of its favorite targets. So it'll create these fragments of tau that lead to the tangles, are known to seed these tangles that you see in the brain of Alzheimer's patients. So yes, we believe tau is an important part of the pathology that this ginger pain hypothesis, as we call it, can explain. But we also can explain the downstream inflammation, the triggering of the complement cascade. So, again, we think that the bacteria and its secretion of these proteases is upstream of many parts of the pathology.
Casey, this is fascinating, and obviously myself as well as millions of people are hoping that you have found a successful formula for approaching Alzheimer's disease. What has been the response from the scientific community so far?
It's been really excellent and gratifying. We were in stealth mode for about 5 years, and we published a paper in Science Advances in January with all of this, not all of the data, but a huge amount of our data, including both the human findings, which we worked on in collaboration with the University of Auckland, as well as the mouse model findings, as well as the therapeutic approach. And when people see that data all together, it's very compelling and very exciting for the scientific community and for the investigators who are working on our study.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Have you had any knocks on the door from larger companies looking to partner up with you?
Well, certainly all the larger companies are very interested in Alzheimer's disease. It is the single biggest unmet medical need, biggest market out there, especially with a disease-modifying therapy. So certainly they're interested, and I think they're interested in this upstream data. Again, if you're looking at a company that's just addressing one part of the inflammatory cascade or just the tau pathology, people are very interested in an approach that may be upstream of all of that.
Excellent. When do you expect to have your phase 1 trial completed?
So this is the phase 3 study that we're doing now.
Oh, I'm sorry, phase 3.
We are guiding for top-line data Q4 2021, and we are in discussions with the FDA now about our statistical analysis plan, but we are potentially planning an interim analysis in 2020, Q4 2020.
That's awesome. I was going to ask you, how closely are you working with the regulators at this point?
Yeah, it's important, and we are working to have as many conversations as we can with the regulators to be sure they're familiar with the approach, in agreement with our plans, and that we can agree on the fastest path to market for patients.
So, again, I wish you great success. We hope that this is a winner going out there. So let's switch tacks just a little bit here, and I'd love to talk to you about you being a role model, not only for women in this space, but for scientists in this space. How does that sit with you?
Well, I think it's great, of course, and one thing I think about in addition to being a role model, another way that I like to think about it is changing people's pattern matching and unconscious bias, because I think it's not only about motivating women to go into new careers, but it's about changing the way investors think about, what is the person who is a CEO? What is the person who has made the money in the past? They have certain biases, unconscious biases about what those people look like, and I think the more we can shift that, the better.
I love how you termed that pattern matching. I hadn't heard that before. It's an interesting term to explain what you just described.
Right. So you want to create the bottom-up push, but also the top-down pull for new opportunities for women.
Absolutely. And you're right. Not all CEOs are old white men sitting in corner offices anymore.
Right. Right.
Or so we hope, right?
Exactly.
That's excellent. So not only have you founded multiple companies, but you also founded the Neurotechnology Industry Organization, and you served as a board member from March 2005, I guess, to September 2018. Tell me about the work that the association is doing, and why did you feel the need to start that organization?
Right. This was along a similar vein as why we started Neuro Insights. We felt that there was a need to bring the community together to talk about common issues, for example, around endpoints, around financing, around funding, and that industry organization really did create a great community of investors who are interested in CNS, of the companies who might have common problems or common celebrations. Additionally, it allowed us to go up onto Capitol Hill and lobby for increased NIH funding to these areas of importance to all of America.
So what was some of that experience like on Capitol Hill and trying to explain the science to the folks that you wanted to get the money from?
Well, people are very receptive. I mean, nearly everyone has a relative with Alzheimer's disease. Looking back 5 years, there was a lot of interest in PTSD and other CNS injuries related to the troops. So, and also these diseases, including Alzheimer's, are a big drain on the healthcare system. People are very worried about the aging population and the cost of that aging population if we don't change the course of diseases like Alzheimer's. So I think people are very receptive. There's been quite a bit of increased NIH funding. So that's, again, kind of the bottom-up approach to increase the R&D. And I think it's important also to think about the top-up, again, the top-up pull. So working with regulators, as we talked about, to create clear and efficient paths to market, thinking about price controls and how that impacts investment into innovation. These are all things that it's important for industry to have an ongoing dialogue with Capitol Hill about.
And so at the start of your journey, what led you to focus on neuroscience? Why is this a passion for you?
I was always very interested in how our brain controls us, both just day to day and then in disease, how your whole personality can change, memory can change. But also I did have 2 grandparents with Alzheimer's disease, so I think that certainly must have had an impact on my interest.
Sure, it's a personal journey for you as well.
Right.
Excellent. So, as a non-traditional CEO, what lessons have you learned along the way that might benefit other women who aspire to reach that executive level?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be a driver of the conversation, to speak your mind, for better or for worse. That is what people respond to and see as leadership. And I think some women may shy away from this, may shy away from sharing their opinions strongly, and I think that's really important.
I agree. Describe your leadership style for me. How is it that you rally the troops? Because let's face it, what you're doing is hard work, and it's fraught with a lot of areas that are ripe for failure. And how do you keep your teams motivated?
Our team is really motivated by the benefit to patients, by the science we see every day, and the benefit that we're going to bring forward. So I don't find I need to kind of rally them day to day. I feel like our team is so self-motivated to help connect the dots for other people outside the company, for the scientific community, and for investors. And so every day they're making new contributions to this hypothesis. So just being on the forefront of such an exciting discovery really seems to motivate everyone to work hard and contribute in every way they can.
Wonderful. You've been part, as we've noted, through a couple of companies, startups, and each one has turned into another opportunity. So how do you define success for yourself? Is it that completion of a milestone? Is it the small wins along the way? So how do you define success for yourself?
So for entrepreneurs, I think success has to be defined as making your best effort and the decisions with the information you have. You can't always control the outcome, but you can really do your best to plan for both the best and the worst outcome. So I think it's really important to plan both the fastest plan to market as well as risk mitigation and multiple paths to be sure that there are no surprises.
And when you are encountered with a surprise or an obstacle, how do you navigate around that? What are some tips that you can provide?
Yeah, so for example, in pharmaceutical development, manufacturing can always be a surprise obstacle. So on that, for example, being really ahead of the game, not cutting your supplies too close, having multiple manufacturers when that's appropriate, is one of those types of things that I'm talking about.
Excellent. Is there a piece of advice you'd like to give to your younger self?
Yeah, I think trusting your gut on hiring decisions is really important. I like to hire people who are very passionate and engaged and hands-on, and also the personality fit with the organization and the executive team is extremely important. So sometimes you might have a niggling feeling when you're making a hire, and I found often that feeling should be listened to. And on the converse side, sometimes you just have a really good feeling about somebody, and in those cases I've been very persistent about getting that person on board, and that's always panned out really well.
Excellent. And finally, because this program is called the WOW program, can you identify a wow moment in your career that either changed the trajectory of your career path or was provided some form of inspiration or was a significant impact on you?
We took Cortexime public in May, and that was a really significant milestone, not just for the company, but for me personally. And most importantly, it brought in financing that allows us to accelerate our development, speed up enrollment, do all the regulatory work that's required to keep moving the program forward the most rapidly for patients. So that was a really exciting milestone that I'm happy we were able to achieve.
Congratulations. That is a significant milestone, and that is a wow. Tell me what you felt like that day. How was that?
Well, that day was really exciting. There was a moment where I was in the room. I was the only woman in the room with about 20 men. All of us were celebrating, and the whole team did just an incredible job. And then we got on a plane while the stock was trading, and we just had an incredible first day of trading. And it's been a very successful IPO, not only for our early investors, but for the later investors. So it was really gratifying, and I felt great. It was a great day.
Congratulations again, and I hope the next time you go IPO that you're not the only woman in the room.
Right, me too.
Casey, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation, and we will track how Cortexime does and look forward to the results from that Phase 3 study.
Thanks so much, Taryn.
Thank you for listening to this episode of WOW, the Woman of the Week podcast series. And once again, thank you to Ogilvy Health for sponsoring this episode. For more information, visit ogilvyhealth.com. And check out our other WOW podcast episodes at pharmavoice.com/wow. This 2019 program is copyrighted by PharmaLinks, LLC.